I encourage people to the greatest extent they can to do commissions, or if you can't do a commission, just see if you can find the money to bring in the composer for a piece that you're doing. Do a Skype session with them. And I don't know anyone that I've ever talked with who has said, I called up so and so composer and they slammed the phone on me. They were not interested in doing it all. It's not. It's absolutely. They're so open.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Are you planning to travel with your group sometime soon? If so, please consider my sponsor, Kaleidoscope Adventures, a full-service tour company specializing in student group travel. With a former educator as its CEO, Kaleidoscope Adventures is dedicated to changing student lives through travel, and they offer high-quality service and an attention to detail that comes from more than 25 years of student travel experience. Trust Kaleidoscope's outstanding staff to focus on your group's one-of-a-kind adventure so that you can focus on everything else. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you knew one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now on to my next guest, Richard Floyd. Hi, Richard.
How are we doing?
I'm doing well. As I told you, I'm calling you from actually my first day of vacation in a long time, so this is a good day.
Well, that's a well-deserved vacation, I'm sure. So good for you. Enjoy it.
Yeah, the school year ended, 10 days ago, and all the ribbons and the bows are on another year, even though it ended with a very differently than usual.
Oh, absolutely. And we don't really have a real clue about what it's going to look like in the fall.
No, indeed not. I teach, I don't know if you know, but I teach 4th through 8th grade at a private school. And we actually had our back to school planning meeting. And we have a pediatric epidemiologist in St. Louis who is one of my trombone player's fathers. And we're going to try to go back to school, but I'm not going to have my normal 4th grade beginners. I'm going to just have my 5th grade band and my middle school band, and then next year we'll start 4th and 5th grade again. We're going to try to mitigate it. I'm still going to have contact with the 4th graders. I'll be able to teach them some things, but not put instruments in their hands. So that's unfortunate, but it could be worse.
But if you can just keep them engaged, my goal that I keep sharing with people is we're worried so much about what's going to happen the first day of school this fall. That's the second layer of priority to me. My priority is I want our kids to be in love with music in the fall of 2021. Whatever it takes to get through that year and build from there.
As you know, it's really hard. I mean, I count on the final concert in the spring to send my young kids especially off with good feelings and have that peak experience so that when it comes time for August, they want to sign up for band. I know I've already lost one student who told me, I think I don't want to play next year. And I mean, I haven't seen them since February, so it's really hard to keep that excitement up when you don't see the kids.
And that is a very common story that I'm hearing right now all across the country. They're just losing momentum.
It's bad. I hope we don't have 2 or 3 lost years in the middle of this. 10 years from now, we don't have the same, quality, at least for a bubble. That would hurt, but we'll see. All we can do is do our best to keep the kids excited about music, teach them whatever we can, whatever we're allowed to teach them. And, so anyway.
Absolutely.
All right. So that was a sort of a grim way to start the interview. So let's get to sort of happier things. If you could introduce yourself for the listeners, that would be terrific.
Well, my name's Richard Floyd, as you already know, and this is year 58 for me in our profession. And I say with all sincerity that I've never worked a day in my life. It's been a love affair from day one. I grew up in a very small community outside of Dallas, Texas. The name of the town was Richardson. It was a very rural setting. In fact, when I started school there wasn't even a band. It was not until I was in the fifth grade that they had a band. And something about those shiny instruments really attracted me. And I couldn't get it out of my mind that I wanted to be a part of whatever that was. And I didn't even know what it was. But it looked like fun to me. I wanted to play clarinet. I wanted to play saxophone. I wanted a shiny horn. But my band director convinced me that, no, let's just try the clarinet instead. The truth was he already had more saxophones than he knew what to do with. And I'm glad he pointed me toward the clarinet, because obviously that's a basic instrument for all the woodwinds, and as my trajectory turned out, that was a great beginning. But it was a very small country band. The person that started the band there, his name was Mr. Gradke, and he literally was a music man that he just went from town to town and started bands in schools. Then he moved on and somebody else came on board. And then I had a high school director. His name is George Gates. Some people might know him. He has a couple of pieces that are still available and still are played. One is Solia Sombra, which is a beautiful paso doble, and another Mosaico de Mexico that he wrote. He was very infatuated with the folk music of Mexico and captured it beautifully. But he was a great director. He had been in the Dallas Symphony. He was a percussionist. And so he just offered me a lot of insights about the world of music. And keep in mind, this was in the 50s. So this was about the same time that Fred Fennell was founding the Eastman Wind Ensemble at Eastman. And George Gates, my band director, was in love with that group. And I would go over at his house, and every time a new Mercury record would come out, I would go over there and he would play it and I would listen to it. So that was my immersion in that level of music. And Chorale and Alleluia, Howard Hanson, Canzona, Peter Menon, La Fiesta Mexicana, the Host Suites, all those pieces that were on those first albums. That was my introduction to the world of wind band music that we experience now. Also had a private clarinet teacher. His name was Clint Davis, and he had actually been on the road with the Tommy Dorsey Band for a long time. He was the real deal professional musician. He retired, lived in Dallas. And, I love that man. I love what he taught me. So that was kind of the way I got started. And by the time I had graduated from high school, the band had grown to over 100 in the high school band. And it's a very small country school, but it was a community that was growing like crazy and had a huge interest in the arts. And it still does. Richardson is still one of the fine arts meccas of the state of Texas. But I have vivid memories of going to Washington, D.C. and marching in Eisenhower's inaugural parade. The march we played was Daughters of Texas by John Philip Sousa. And it had a hell of a clarinet obligato part on the trio that I probably could pick up my clarinet and play today if I chose to. I'll never forget it. So anyway, that's kind of the way all that started. And then when I started looking at universities, I wasn't sure what I was going to major in. At one time, I thought I was going to be a national park ranger. I just loved the outdoors. I thought I would go and take care of the bears and make sure people didn't get in the geysers at Yellowstone. But there was a word that kept jumping out as I looked at catalogs, or two words. It was music education. And when I looked in the book, and I couldn't get that out of my mind. And so that's what I did. And so I went to Southern Methodist University, middle school of music in Dallas. I went there because that's where my clarinet teacher was at that time. You, as we both know, you kind of gravitate to those things that are familiar to you. And it was I loved Oakley Pittman and loved his teaching, and so that's where I went to school. Finished there, and I went back to Richardson to teach. That wasn't planned, but that program was growing, as I mentioned earlier, and as a result of that, they were adding people, and I did my student teaching there. And then they said, "Would you like to come here and work?" And I said, "Well, yeah." Yeah, so I went there as a junior high school band director in the fall of 1962 and taught junior high school band for 5 years. The high school director was a man by the name of Joe Frank, who was one of my first and most meaningful mentors. He was wonderful in countless ways. So the bug bit me, and I knew that's just what I had to do. And so I was there for 5 years, and then they opened a new high school and asked if I would be interested in being the high school director. So with 5 years experience, I went to the new Pierce High School in the community there and started out with just eighth grade. It was what? Seventh, eighth, and ninth grade. That was it. That was the high school. Then the next year we had 10th grade, and the next year 11th grade, and then all of a sudden we had the full-blown group. But that was a pretty steep learning curve, and it was a very intense time for me, but also a very rewarding time. So by 11 years teaching, I'd had 5 years of middle school, junior high teaching, and 6 years at the high school. I also kind of pitched in with a fine arts director position for the last couple of years. But I love teaching, and I love being around kids, and I love making music. But there was something that was missing during that time. I was a victim of my culture. I knew how to be a Texas band director. And
we'll talk about that.
Yeah. A lot of things about that are good, and there's a lot of things that to me personally are not so good. But it was becoming empty in several ways to me. And during that time, I went to a camp. I've told this story several times, and I have a dual reason for telling it. But it was a summer band camp at West Texas State University up in the Panhandle. And it was a 2-week camp, huge camp, over 1,000 students involved. They would always bring in a high-powered conductor for the top group, and I was there doing sectional rehearsals and teaching saxophone. And they brought in this guy I had never heard of in my life, and he had just moved from Long Beach State to Madison, Wisconsin. His name was Bob Reynolds. And it just turned out that his break in the morning between his rehearsals was the same time as my break. And there was not very many people in the teacher's lounge during that time. So we kind of gravitated to each other and had wonderful conversations. And I left that 2-week thinking, okay, if the way I believe is crazy, there's at least one more person that's crazy. Bob's crazy too. Because we discovered we were kindred spirits in terms of what we felt about the artistry of the music. And the sidebar of that story, I mean, that was a turning point, meeting him. But the sidebar to that story, and I tell young directors this a lot, that we must be prepared every day and be open every day. There's someone walking into our lives who changes our trajectory. And you never know when it's going to happen, but it is going to happen. There's going to be something that connects and resonates that's going to recalibrate who you are and what you do. And that was one of those moments for him. But it's important to be open for those moments. If you have tunnel vision and reject those opportunities, then you will continue down the same pathway. So I continued to explore options, and at one point somebody said, well, maybe you ought to think about doing your doctorate. I'd done my master's. And so I was starting to look into that and thinking, well, maybe I want to teach in college at one point. I wasn't sure, but it was intriguing to me. And then I was given the advice that, well, if you're going to do that, why don't you go ahead? You might think about teaching in college. So why don't you go ahead and get your vita together and just put your toe in the water and start applying for some positions, just kind of see what's going on. You have a pretty good reputation right now. Most of my reputation at that time was winning stuff, because that's what Texas band directors did. I knew how to do that. But So I did. I put it together, and obviously I didn't get any callbacks. But then all of a sudden, and I was about ready to go back. I was going to go to the University of Texas. Bill Moody was there then, and I was going to do my doctorate, and I had going to take a year to be with him. And then all of a sudden, Baylor University called and said, "We'd like to talk to you about coming here as our director." And like 2 months later, they offered me the position. So with 11 years experience, making me 32 years old, I was all of a sudden the director of bands at Baylor. And it's kind of like that. And I've said this a number of times too. It's like that proverbial dog that chases and chases a fire truck. And one of these days they catch one, and they don't know what in the heck they're going to do with it now that they have this big red monster. So I went to Baylor, and it was a very young program. I didn't even have an assistant. I didn't have a graduate student. I didn't have anybody. I was a one-man show with the University Marching Band and Wind Ensemble trying to establish itself, but a fantastic faculty of instrumental professors that loved the wind band and loved what we were trying to do. So I jumped into the deep end of the pool and immediately discovered I had no idea what I was doing. And there was a thing then, I don't know whether, maybe, Mark, you may have heard of this. It was called the Wind Ensemble Conference. There were a number of them were held in the 70s, and it was actually a spinoff from the College Band Directors National Association. There were a lot of young directors who felt like the CBDNA had lost its direction, and there was more people like Bob and like myself and others who were saying, that's not where we want the wind band to go. We want to have a vision for the artistry and the repertoire that we perform. So we put together this group, and some of the ringleaders of it were, well, Fred Fennell was really involved with it. John Painter at Northwestern was. Don Hernsberger, who was then at Eastman, was. David Whitwell, who was at Cal State Northridge. Myself, Bob, Larry Livingston was involved with it. But we just created our own little conference and to talk about the things we wanted to talk about. First one of those I went there, I have to admit, I was pretty full of myself. I'd had a very successful high school career. I had landed this university position that I was trying to figure out, but I must be good or they wouldn't have offered it to me. And I went to that first Wind Ensemble Conference, and it was held at I believe it was at University of Illinois with Robert Gray. It had nothing to do with the band program at Illinois. It was within the music school. And I went there just very, very full of who I was and what I was about to achieve. And I heard the names of composers I had never heard of. I heard people talking about music I didn't know. I heard people discussing books that I had never read. And the Dick Floyd that left Waco, Texas to go to that meeting that was pretty tall and full of himself came home, and I was about 3 inches tall. I was totally destroyed. And I felt like I had an option then. I either redirected my goals and met that challenge, or I crawled back into my hole and just continued to pretend that what I was doing was fine. And I chose item number one. So I would go to one of those conferences with a notebook, and I'd come back, and that notebook would be a full list of composers, music, names, books, and I would head to the library. And it was really kind of a educational process that I pulled myself up in my bootstraps and became a part of that world that I thought was so absolutely magnificent. And I do still think it's magnificent. And in the process, then I started meeting some other people. The year that I went to Baylor, Tom Lee went to the University of Texas as the wind ensemble conductor. And he also was a friend of Bob Reynolds. Bob told Tom and told me, you guys need to get together. You will be great friends. And we did, and we are to this day. And this little network began to expand. And then another person came into the equation. That was Alan McMurray, who ultimately, he was at Michigan briefly, but then he went to the University of Colorado. And then the final member of that little group of 5 was Craig Kirchhoff. And we became the closest of friends. We refer to ourselves as kindred spirits. I would say that we're closer to brothers than we are friends. And both personally, artistically, intellectually, we challenge each other. We support each other. It's been an absolutely magic relationship, and that relationship continues to this day. We find time to be together, and we talk a lot on the phone. And it's been an amazing part of my life. You know, some people say that we become the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. And if we surround ourselves with wonderful people, we surround ourselves with artistic people, the reality is that we can grow from those relationships. And so I feel very blessed that that's been the case. So I was at Baylor 11 years. 9 years at Baylor, and had a wonderful experience. We performed at the National College Band Directors Association Convention, University of Maryland. Did the premiere of Dream Sequence with Ernst Krenek. Shared the stage with the Eastman Wind Ensemble. Pretty inspiring environment to be a part of. We did a number of recordings. We collaborated with guest soloists, and the group flourished, and it was a wonderful experience. And during that time, they finally gave me the opportunity to have an assistant director. And by then I had a TA. I had a TA that was working with me. And I really liked the guy a lot, and he was doing a really good job. And so when we had the opportunity to hire somebody, he was finishing up. So I thought, this is perfect if he's interested. So I asked him if he'd like to stay on. And his name was Michael Haithcock, who is now the director of bands at the University of Michigan. So he was my assistant. He came there in music ed. And he came to me in the fall and said, he's now been here for a while. He said, I'm really interested. I think I'm more interested in conducting. I think I want to change my major to conducting. So I told Mike, I said, that's a great idea, except we don't have a master's in conducting. We can't do that. But I will set up a trajectory for you, and we'll just set up a degree plan that we'll just do ourselves. You stay in music ed, but we will guide you in the direction you think you want to go. So Mike and I shared responsibilities there for a number of years. Then I ended up leaving there for a year. Initially, it was just for a year. I was going to I had a call from a person at the University of South Florida that I knew, and they had had a search go bad, and they were in dire straits. Jim Croft had just left there and gone to Florida State, and they had a hard time replacing him. And of course, he was a hard person to replace. He was a wonderful, wonderful man, great conductor, teacher. But they said, would you come and if we could get somebody to come for a year residency to help us get through this. And I'd always wanted to live in Florida. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. And so I had been at Baylor long enough that I could take a year sabbatical. So I went down there. And one of the first things I discovered was how wonderful it was to do something besides marching band on Saturday all fall, because they didn't have a marching band. They didn't have a football team even. And to make a long story short, I ended up deciding to stay there. Because it was all about music. It was all about, I had 2 days a week to be in schools, to be mentors for directors and try to build a program. And it just seemed exciting. And I was loving living in Florida. But then the next year, the University of Texas called about the possibility of being here as the director of the University Interscholastic League. And so after much soul searching, I made that decision to move to Austin in 1984, and we are still here, and we're not going anyplace. I was state director of music for 29 years, and also initially with that position, it was a dual appointment within the School of Music. So I taught graduate wind lit, woodwind pedagogy. I conducted the wind ensemble for 1 year before Jerry Junkin came on board, and so it was a nice kind of a soft transition. And during that transition, I also became involved with the Austin Symphonic Band that became my musical outlet. And we've been together now for nearly 30 years with that group. So I've been pretty much middle school, high school, college, small college, community bands, pretty much all of it. My wife is Cheryl, of course, is a middle school band director. So sometimes when people tell me I don't get it anymore about what middle school band is, I just simply tell them I have middle school band for dinner every friggin' night. I know exactly what it is. So that's kind of got me to here. I've been retired for 4 years now, and I'm failing retirement miserably. So, but loving every minute of it.
So there's a lot in your story to talk about. So I hope you have some time for plenty of questions.
Whatever you say.
So I have some notes here about what I want to ask you, we'll go back to the beginning a little bit. But the one thing that comes through really strongly in your story is you're connected with some of the great names in the profession. And, you mentioned, I talked to Craig Kirchhoff about 2 months ago for the podcast, and he mentioned how his meeting with Bob Reynolds, changed his career and his trajectory. If you could talk a little bit more about that idea of, building your network and how you could come across people and open yourself up. You mentioned being open opportunity. What can a director do, a young person do to kind of keep themselves open for these things and to build that network in an honest and wholesome way that leads to opportunity?
I think there could be several answers to that. One, this initially sounds a little bit egotistical, and I think I have to kind of frame it a little bit. But I've heard it said that if you discover that you're the smartest person in the room, it's time to change rooms.
Right. Yeah.
You need to thrust yourself into an environment that challenges you and pushes you. If you're around people all the time that make you feel comfortable, you will feel comfortable, but there will be no opportunity for challenge or no opportunity for growth. So I can tell you that without reservation that during those early visits we had with those 5 people that we were mentioning a minute ago, and there's others, obviously, but with those 5 people, 4 people, 5th one me, there would be times we would be together, and I was scared to death to open my mouth because I was so afraid I was going to say something stupid. And their artistry was so beyond what I felt my artistry was. Their awareness and their knowledge and their perception. And it was on occasion, it was pretty uncomfortable. But we've had conversations since then that all those people at one time or another have sensed that discomfort. But that's where growth happens. That's where the depth of what we do. So I think the main thing is not to retreat from those. I can even remember, I'm going back even further when I was teaching in Richardson. We, just like you do and everybody does, you have your honor bands and you have guest conductors come in and so forth. And we in Richardson, in that area around Dallas, we would bring in the very best, we would bring in John Painter to conduct the band. We would have major people that would come in, and could be easy to be intimidated by those people. I would fight tooth and toenail to be the person that got to go to the airport to pick that person up.
Oh, absolutely.
I wanted to be as close to that person for as long as I could. Mm-hmm. And I think every opportunity that we have for that, it becomes incredibly important to us. I also think it's incredibly important to when all state bands and honor bands rehearse, I'm going to be on the front row. I'm not going to miss the opportunity to see a master conductor teacher rehearse. And I'm talking about even today. at 80 years old, if we do have a TMEA in February, I will be on that front row in that rehearsal because I want to learn from that master that's there and be a part of that. So I think that's a lot of it. You're right. I was very lucky. Another thing that happened to me while I was at Baylor was that I got a call one day, and I knew the man. I didn't know him well, but I got a call from Frank Battisti, who was in New England, and he said, we're getting ready to replace the Secretary Treasurer for the College Band Directors Association, and I think you would be a good person to do that. I didn't even know what that meant, but I immediately said, yes, I'll do it. And so for the next 30 years, 26 years, I worked with every president of CBDNA very closely, intimately for a 2-year block of time. And those were the absolute icons of that period. So I was lucky from that standpoint that I did get to engage with them. But you can't run from the challenge. You have to either embrace it or cease to benefit from the relationships.
Well, you mentioned that you talked about when you had the opportunity to go to Baylor and take that job or back out and go back to being, high school band director. And, there's nothing wrong with being a high school band director, but you took the next step.
Absolutely not.
You took the next step, which felt most logical to you for your growth. Yeah. All right. So I was going to ask you, this goes way back, but I mean, I just talked to Jason Fettig a little while ago for the show, and we talked about the inauguration, and you mentioned that you marched in Eisenhower's inauguration.
Yeah.
What was that like as a young person to do that? I mean, that to me is like a major thing. I mean, maybe it's just my age showing, but that deep respect for that particular thing that happens every 4 years.
Well, number one, it was very cold. I remember that. But I mean, that was a huge event to be able to do that. And it was, we traveled from Dallas to Richardson to Washington by train. It was about a 36-hour train ride up there. And we were there for a full week. And I mean, we did all the tours and did all the things and that you would do as tourists. We went to Smithsonian, went to Mount Vernon, all the monuments. It was a life-changing experience. There was no question about it. And I mentioned this was a small school, so this was a band of 100 students from grade 7 through grade 12. I mean, we had that was old-fashioned small rural school. So we had little kids, 7th graders that were making that trip and marching in that parade.
12, 13, yeah, they're little.
Yeah, and we sold a lot of candy bars to get to go with that too. But it was a major experience. And I think my brother still has the clarinet that he played in that parade. I'm sure he does.
Wow.
I know it was at our home, and when we lost our mother and dad, then we divided things up, and I know that was something he took, and I'm sure he still has it. But
that's a remarkable story, and it's amazing. You mentioned the candy bars. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
Yeah, you got to push the sugar.
So I guess the most important question I can ask you, and perhaps the one that you can shed the most light on, is the Texas band phenomena. Because for those of us who are outside of Texas and haven't really experienced it other than kind of watching it from afar, sure, it seems like its own little world. So I would just, if you can just talk about, like, first of all, the phenomena. Where did it start, this idea of Texas and how the bands became so important?
I'm not sure how articulately I can speak to how it got started. I think it had a great deal to do with community pride. And of course, that was Texas, like a lot of states, have a big focus on their high school athletics also. And it was real easy to wrap the band experience into that same phenomenon. But there was a definite interest in and having bands within communities, and sometimes they were not just high school bands, they would be kind of a mixture. In fact, that one town would recruit a good trombone player down the road. We'll recruit them and give their parents a job over here so we can get them. It was an interesting culture at that time. I'm going all the way back into the 20s and 30s when I say all that. But I think that, at least from my experience, when I came on board, when I first started teaching in 1962, the band programs were fairly established. They were very competitive. Everything was built around the next event that you're going to be a part of. And whether it was solo and ensemble, or whether it was making the all-state band or the all-county band, or whether it was making a superior rating at the events and this concert events in the spring, it was all built around bringing lots of schools together and show and tell. Essentially what it was. But I think one of the things that happened was that there was a tremendous emphasis on pedagogy. And part of that came from, as I'm told, and part of this is from some of the people that were the icons when I first started teaching. After World War II, there were a number of military band members who came out and then either went with the GI Bill. They liked what they were doing, and they ended up being band directors in Texas, in West Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. Wonderful bands in the Rio Grande Valley at that time. And they literally only experience they had was what they experienced in the service bands that were made up of people who played pretty good. So they thought, okay, I've got to get these little kids to play pretty good. And so there was an incredible emphasis on fundamentals and on structure and on routine. And I think that was one of the things that I learned the most early on about the importance of fundamentals. We all take that for granted now, but I think there was an occasion in that was not that much the case, that it was more of a social thing was going on. Now, I'm going to put a disclaimer in here about anything we're saying about this. I'm to the point, I feel like that there are wonderful bands and band communities all across this country. I think that the directors, that's one of the joys that Cheryl and I are having now, not right this minute with COVID-19, but up to that point is the time we get to spend with dedicated, passionate teachers across the country. And I would argue that the love affair that music educators have with our art and our craft and with our students is priceless. Not always have the same amount of resources. You can do more in Band A and Community A than you can do in Community C, but it didn't mean that it's any less of a meaningful experience.
Sure. No, I teach at a small school, and I have my struggles with what I do, but I love the kids, and the kids learn, and they're excited about music.
You bet.
They're not gonna win UIL if we transplanted them down to Texas, but they love what they do, and that's all to me that really matters. I'm going to ask you in a minute. I'm going to ask you sort of a question about that, but I want to kind of talk about this idea of fundamentals, because for me as a teacher outside of Texas, I always read every summer the Eddie Green book that Mary Ellen Cavett at Eddie Green on teaching band, because to me it summarizes that idea of fundamentals, that Texas mindset. And I listen to people like Darcy Vaught Williams, who's has her show. It talks about teaching in Texas, and how much does a UIL experience play into that? And maybe if you want to talk about what UIL is for my non-Texas listeners or people who don't know.
Well, UIL stands for University Interscholastic League. And I, as mentioned earlier, I was responsible for the music category of that for all that period of time I was at the University of Texas. And the University Interscholastic League is a part of the University of Texas. It's not some kind of a little club of some kind. It's a part of the university. And it interestingly the UIL was founded actually before World War I. There was the determination made that the University of Texas needed to have more of an outreach to the state, to the communities across the state. And that much of the state was very rural, was very agrarian, and their attitude was that university in Austin was just a highfalutin place that we really didn't need. We just need to raise our cattle and take care of our farms. So it started out with speech and debate, and track and field, and became a catalyst for organizing school competitions and those. Then it added drama, it added all kinds of academic events, it added music, and music didn't come on board until the 50s because music had been a part of the Texas Music Educators Association up until then. It existed, but it was a separate category. I think the main two or three things that we have. Number one with the UIL is the fact that it has credibility. Every school embraces UIL, and whether it's drama, whether it's one-act play, whether it's athletics, whether it's math, computer science, you name it, it is embraced and revered by every school. And so there is no required advocacy to get those kinds of activities to be supported within the community. It's a UIL event. Of course it's a good event. It has that image. And I think in the music area, that was one of the things that when I came on board in 84, was some people actually candidly said to me, said, why in the world do you want that job? All you're going to do is making sure people go by the rules. And I said, I didn't accept that position for what it was. I accepted it for what I thought it could be, because I thought it could be a catalyst to change the trajectory and change the priorities and change the direction of what we valued in our music programs in the schools. And I would like to think to some extent that we were able to do that. I know we did it in terms of repertoire, in terms of we have what's called a prescribed music list that is selected, and many states use that same list. But we completely redirected. It's not perfect by any means, and it's not going to always please everybody because there's so much diversity in taste. You can't please everybody, but we did redirect people's priorities in terms of the kinds of music that was being played, and I'll always be proud of that. We also had a major impact, and some people will say, well, you didn't have as much impact as you think, but we had a major impact on the marching band scene because of the fact that we simply changed the system of calibrating winners. Let's put it that way. Then this is what it takes. And there was a huge push in the 80s on general effects and bigger, more expensive, louder, brighter, more flags. And that was winning. And so people were adding more and more of that to it. And so we put together a committee and we completely changed our scoring system to where none of that mattered. You could have it if you wanted to. So if you wanted to go to a BOA event, then that's fine. But you can have that, but you don't need it. So if you choose to be a military band, or you choose to be a band that has only 2 flags out there, and you do not want to have 2 tractor trailer loads of props with you, you can do that and be successful. And that made a huge difference. And it also created more credibility for those I hate to use the term have-not schools, but those schools that didn't have the financial resources that our more affluent areas have. So it leveled the playing field from that standpoint, I think. And so those were the kinds of things that we were able to make a change because we're competitive people. You're a competitive person. We all measure some of what we do by the success of what we do. Nothing wrong with that. But same token, we tend to teach the test. If you say this is what's important to measure my success, I'll be really good at it. So if we can pick the right things to be good at, then the competition can be okay. But if it's skewed toward the lesser priorities, non-artistic priorities, then we have a problem.
All right, I'm going to ask you maybe a more difficult question because I think, I don't know if where this comes from necessarily, but you hear it a lot about Texas, is that when we focus so much on fundamentals and we focus so much on those basics, are we losing creativity? Are we losing that part of the equation? And, there's been a big push towards creativity in the last 20 years.
I think that's an excellent question. And I could answer it immediately by saying yes and no. And really, because I believe more every day that really and truly every band has its own culture. Every school, I'm probably in 150 schools this spring, and everyone has its own culture, and you can immediately tell the ones that all they care about is the fundamentals, and we're going to get it right, and make sure that you don't make a mistake. And I have a clinic presentation I use quite a few times during the year called the Pathways to a Happy Workshop. And it's all about that if there can be spontaneity, if there can be creativity, if there can be a sense of engagement in making music, the reality is that it's probably going to be a happy workshop. If it's all based around do what I tell you to do, we're going to do it at metronome 120 today. Next week it's going to be 128. Those kids don't smile as much, and there's not that sense of happiness in those environments. And I can tell you, one of the schools that I'm very thankful that I have a close relationship with them. But Vandergrift High School, it's not but just 15 minutes from me, right over there. With Mike Howard. And that's one of the most amazing programs I've ever been a part of. Do they do the fundamentals? Man, do they do the fundamentals. But you never realize they're working on fundamentals because they're dealing with fundamentals as they apply to the music, not just to do fundamentals. And there's a very big difference. I can tell you that there's programs in this state and there's districts in the state that fundamentals is key. And if you get all the fundamentals and you get it in tune, the music will take care of itself, which is preposterous. It just can't happen.
Okay, so I guess, we should probably talk about young teachers and what you would offer as far as your wisdom to them. Because I think, one of the things I want to try to leave from this show is I want people to listen to it and be able to take some advice with them to their classroom. And so if you thought about some advice that you would give to young band directors at any level, do you have any sort of thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think one of the things that young directors, well, any of us at any age, need to always be mindful of is the reality that we do what we do because at some point music made us feel in a certain way. It was all about feeling. And I think we get so wrapped up sometimes in the minutia of all the day-to-day activities that we're involved with, and parent meetings and competitions and fundraising and all those other things that take our time, that we forget the importance of feeling. And we lose track of that is the real reason we're involved. I remember you probably, I don't know whether you've seen any of them, but Travis Cross has been doing these Zoom sessions. And we did one with him, and it was actually Alan McMurray and Craig Kirkhoff and myself and Tom Lee were the four that were on there. And about halfway through, I said, right now, I bet if we did a word count of the word that was used the most in our discussion, the word was feeling. That word came up again and again, whether it was about other people, whether it was about music, whether it was about teaching. But we must remember the necessity of feeling and the feelingfulness of what we do. I think number one, and I think number two that we need to be ever mindful that we can call ourselves band directors, we can call ourselves music educators, we can call ourselves teachers, we can call ourselves any label we want to, but above all else, first and foremost, we are an artist. And if we can't remember and can't embrace and be a part of artistry, and not just the artistry of music, but the artistry of visual art, the artistry of theater, the artistry of poetry, we're a much bigger picture than grade 4 band music. We're involved with much more than that. And so I think the importance that I keep referencing some of the projects I'm involved with, but I tell people at least once a day, you ought to look in the mirror and say, I am an artist before I'm anything else. I'm doing a lot of research right now, and in fact, it's part of a project, part of a book I'm working on, but about how we become an artist teacher. And John Steinbeck said that there is few artist teachers as there are great any other kind of artists. And but the important thing about being an artist teacher is because you're dealing with the human spirit of a human being. And I'm convinced that what is it that a great artist does? They draw you into their world of artistry. They draw you into their beauty. So if we can be an artist and be an artist teacher, then that, I think, to me is the ultimate goal what we can achieve.
Yeah, it's like I tell people, I say it all the time, but to me, I don't teach music to kids. I teach kids with music. The idea is that there's more to this than just the notes. It's about building better people, about giving them a mode of expression, a mode of feeling, something bigger than what they can get, anywhere else.
I couldn't agree more.
If let's say that you were going to, and again, I know you're happily retired, but let's say that you were going to start a high school band tomorrow, what would be the one thing that you would do tomorrow that you did your first day in Richardson at the middle school? Is there something that's sort of been a common thread throughout your teaching?
I think the best answer to that would be that if you asked me that question probably 10 years ago, I would hold up a document that's probably about 10 pages thick. That would be single space, all the things that I want to make sure happen. If you had asked me that 30 years ago, that document would have been 50 pages thick. Because with all the little minute things that I was going to feel like this had to be a part of this. If you ask me that today, I will tell you that anytime that I step in front of a group of students, and I don't care whether it's a collegiate group, whether it's a high school, whether it's Austin Symphonic Band, or whether it's a middle school all-county honor band, I just have two objectives. Number one is to lead them to think for themselves, to make decisions on their own, teach them and lead them to think for themselves, and then take them someplace that they have never been before. That's it. That's my two. I don't even need a whole sheet of paper anymore. And I'm the first to admit that to do that, I'm drawing on 58 years of experience and applications that I can embed into that. But that's pretty much my dream. So I'm gonna do my best to have those kids be in love with music and in love with sharing it.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Ann Molesky, and I'm the host of the Anna Krusek Podcast, another podcast in the Muted Network. It's my mission to help music teachers be more purposeful, sequential, and joyful in each and everything they do as teacher musicians. Join me every Thursday as I share tips, tricks, and meaningful conversations with other music teachers about how to make the general music classroom more intentional and impactful for both you and your students.
All right, let's do the final questions, and I really appreciate your time. This has been great so far. We've got
Can I interject? Can I go back to the competition thing for just 1 second?
Sure.
Just this two quick examples of when competition goes bad, when it goes dark, and one of them actually was Cheryl's youngest sister, and she was in high school. We were visiting at my in-laws' house, and I was quizzing her about the music they were playing, and she was in a wonderful high school band, And I said, "What piece you?" Well, I'm not sure what the name of it is. It's got this really hard solo in it, and then there's a lot of flute going on, and but then she says, but Mr. X, I won't say who his name was, Mr. So and so says that if we really get this worked out, we can easily be the winner when we go to St. Louis in May. and I quizzed her, and I finally got enough information out of her. It was the transcription of the Hindemith symphonic metamorphosis. That was what they were doing, and how tragic. The notes didn't matter, and nothing mattered except we're going to get this down good.
Yeah, it was the notes and making it was perfect, not the music itself. Yeah, that is tragic, and that's why I asked the question about what's the line between healthy and unhealthy competition. You just sort of answered it. It's when it becomes about. It's not the music anymore. It's not the kid anymore. It's something else.
Yes, yeah. But anyway, that's a graphic example. I had to share that with you.
Sure. Well, that's great. So the next question I usually ask everyone, and it's one that no one ever answers well because we're all in love with our careers, and that's how do you find a work-life balance in a career in music?
Okay, I think maybe to discuss that, I have to admit that I'm the luckiest person on the planet. Because I have a wife, a soulmate, a kindred spirit who has the same love affair I do. It's unbelievable. We pinch ourselves sometimes. I think that's helpful, but we also focus on other things than our profession. We love to cook. We create opportunities to experience things that are joyful to us. We're all about the water, and we've owned a sailboat, we've owned a ski boat, and we love to go to the Caribbean when we can. We were supposed to go in May, but that didn't work out too well. And then I scuba dive. We're very much in physical fitness. We work out religiously. So you have to invest in yourself. You can't benefit others if you can't be the best that you are. And I think you have to have the discipline to do that. And one other thing that I would say that has to do that, this actually is from our pastor that made this. He gave a sermon one Sunday about the importance of margins in our life. And that the reality is that if we plan every second of our day and every minute of our life down to the millisecond of what we do, there's never any time to stop and reflect. There's never any time to invest in deepening who we are. And going back when I was at Baylor, I had a professor that was in a Sunday school class. His name was Stan Campbell. He was a history professor. And he... near the end of my first year, he said, "Well, how's it going, Dick?" I said, "Well, I think it's all okay." I said, "I'm having to really adjust to this reality. I'm used to teaching in high school where the bell rings and 50 people come in. 55 minutes later, the bell rings and there's a flurry and another 50 people come in." I said, "Here, I don't have any a scheduled event until noon on Tuesday and Thursday, and it's just a different tempo." And he said, "Dick," he says, "never forget that part of what Baylor University is paying you to do is to sit and think, is to sit and focus and be creative in what you do." So I think we have to really work hard to be good to ourselves. But I have to concede, I think it's been easier for me from that standpoint because of the fact that we both were involved in the same profession. But we always put our family first. And Weston, our son, if he had an event, nothing else mattered besides his event. And that's always been that way.
Yeah, my wife is a cello professor, and so we enjoy a musical family as well. But it's the same thing. The kids are always first, always, because they matter more, to be honest.
Yep, and they should.
Yep. All right, this is a big question, and there's no single answer that anyone can give. But from where you sit and from your experience, what are the challenges that are facing music education, and how can we best meet them as we go forward?
I think, of course, let's just take the current health situation, the pandemic, out of the equation. That's kind of not making it small, but that's an anomaly. I feel like that one of our biggest challenges is that we need to embrace a broader vision of what music education means, and a broader scope of how we deliver music education. We were talking earlier, you asked the question about UIL and about the contest and how's that changed and so forth. Let's get real. I mean, you go to Midwest, nothing's changed in those concerts in 30 years. They're pretty much the same. And that's not a bad thing, but they are what they are. And the same thing is true. I don't care if I go and adjudicate a festival in San Luis, it's going to be pretty much like doing one in Atlanta, Georgia. And where are the other instruments, and where's the other kinds of creativities, and why are we being more involved in improvisation, and why are we being involved more in composition? We're simply continuing to do the same things we've done for 100 years. Teach 3 songs and have somebody tell us whether they're good or not.
Did you articulate that march just right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, you're absolutely right. And, we have to try to find a way, because the world, these kids are creating every day on YouTube, on their computers. They're using software. They're making their own songs. I mean, at some point in the classroom, we have to be able to say, here are some skills. Here's how we connect to that you're loving to do. Otherwise, we're going to lose this whole thing. We have to be more creative with the way we teach. It's just, I think it's an imperative. I think it's a really good answer. And again, I don't try to editorialize, but you've got me editorializing.
Go for it.
Well, I try to just to be the steady, just being the interviewer, but my band director thing comes through too. All right. If I could give you a time machine and take you back to your high school graduation, what would you tell yourself?
Hey, of course, you had sent me those questions, and interestingly, Yamaha had asked me that question a year ago, and they had asked me to write a letter to myself for Support Ed, the magazine that they put out. Sure. So. If you don't mind, I've got it here. I would like to just read it.
Sure, absolutely. I'm sure my listeners would love to hear that.
This is what I said to myself. It's 1962, and you are about to embark on an amazing life journey. Let remind you that you are not here today because you finally learned to play the chromatic scale at a metronome marking of 144. Discovered a new alternate fingering on your clarinet, or mastered a challenging passage. You chose music because of an emotional connection. Music touched your heart and soul in a series of defining moments, and you realized that you couldn't live without it and became consumed with the dream of sharing with others. Always remember that it is the art of making music that gives it true value. In truth, recreating notes on a printed page is no more or less rewarding than solving an algebra equation. No music has been created. But when those notes and rhythms are infused with your spirit and passion for creating and sharing beauty, the outcome is priceless. Never lose sight of this reality. Trust me, it will be easy to become obsessed with personal achievements, extrinsic goals, a boundless litany of suggested strategies, endless competition, and alluring peripheral activities that disguise themselves as being central to the true purpose of music education. Do not be seduced by these illusions. If you remain ever mindful of those magic moments that ignited your fire for making and teaching music, and you strive to create those kinds of experiences with your students, you will enrich countless lives. Continually remain a student and be good to yourself. Why? To paraphrase famed British conductor Simon Rattle, the more you put into yourself, the more you will be able to give back to your students and to the music. And to that end, strive daily to expand your horizons. Give yourself permission to color outside the lines. If you insist on staying inside the lines, on being safe within your comfort zone, those lines will become your boundaries. One of my favorite quotes is by Ursula Le Guin. It goes like this: "It is good to have an end to journey toward, but it is the journey that matters in the end. Let that core reality be your guide. And above all, never forget that life's journey is a do-it-yourself project. It's you and only you who can go for it."
If you had a choice, what would be the final work that you'd want to conduct?
I I can narrow it down to two. I can't narrow it down to one.
Two works.
And I say that because essentially to me, these are bookend works. They are absolutely on one end the empirical example of beauty for wind instruments, and that's the Mozart Gran Partita. I mean, that's God speaking through Mozart. I'm sorry, by any measure. And then on the other end of the equation, the spectrum, it would be the Dahl Sinfonietta, Ing of Dahl. That piece has had deep meaning for me for many, many years. I actually played that piece with my high school band the last year I was taught in high school, and but the artistry of that piece, and I'm fearful it doesn't get played very much because
not so much.
It's so you can't get through it unscathed. There's no way. It is so delicate, but the beauty and the sincerity of the music in that piece is amazing. It's a masterwork. So I could leave this earth happily if I could do those two pieces. And I will take them very slow when the time comes.
Touche. Yeah, I was just listening to the Gran Partita the other day, and I had one of those goosebump moments, and it's in the spot everyone gets the goosebumps with that, that oboe solo that just hangs out in the air. I mean, it's just unbelievable, that moment. Yeah. There's I can think of maybe a half dozen moments in music that make me feel like that. Yeah, and that's one.
And you go back and they make you feel like that again
every time.
It's not a surprise gee whiz moment. It is an absolute crucial, heartfelt, spiritual connection.
It's when the voices enter in Beethoven 9. It's when, and the Irish tune, that trumpet high C at the big texture when the whole band is playing at the forte. There's the moments like that every time I hear them, I'm just like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, that's always fun to talk about. All right, so this is a little bit of an odd time. We're recording in June of 2020, and we're in the middle of the coronavirus quarantine. And so it's strange to ask, but is there anything coming up that you would like to share or promote?
Well, I think if I may, I would be very happy to say that I'm not sure when it's going to be coming out, but my second book is with GIA right now. It's being formatted. We've got the cover picked out for it, and it's all ready. Almost you could say in the can. So it should be published by the end of this year.
Do we have a title?
Yeah, it's The 7 Deadly Sins of Making Music.
Well, that's an intriguing title, that's for sure. Yeah. Draws your interest.
Yeah, well, where it came from, they asked me to do a clinic several years ago for Texas Bandmasters, and I said, I've run out of topics. I don't need to do anymore. And people are tired of listening to me. Let somebody else. And he said, no, I want you to do it. And finally he convinced me to do it. And so he immediately said, what are you going to talk about? And I said, the 7 Deadly Sins of Music Making. He said, great. And he hung up. And I look out the window. I was sitting here at this desk where I am right now. And I thought, what in the hell did I just get myself into?
Yeah.
And I struggled with it all spring about what that was going to be. And I finally came up with our sins are not sins that it's not sins of commission. They're sins of omission. The things that we don't do. And I broke it down to 7. It's articulation, dynamics, rhythm, tempo, lines, silence, proportion. And they become more subjective as you go through them. But then I added words: generic articulation, unconvincing dynamics, perceiving all rhythms literally, being a slave to tempo markings, absence of line, ignoring the role of silence, and failure to consider the role of proportion. And so Each one of those, I have a chapter on each one, and I have lots of excerpts. I've spent a lot of time talking to composers about the things that they think are important. But for example, articulation, we tend to teach articulation for the sake of precision. Let's start the notes together. Let's stop the notes together. It's never what is the shape of the note. What is the meaning of the note? Unconvincing dynamics. We tend to compress the dynamics so we don't offend anybody, and we put no artistry into rhythm whatsoever. We just sit there and look at that rhythm. Exactly 3/4 of a beat and 1/4 of a beat. We micromanage it and we squeeze all the music out of it. So anyway, each one of those, absence of line and what that means, and how important silence is to music. And I did a lot of research on that. And so each of these chapters kind of goes into what it means to take those fundamental elements that we have in music and then push the envelope in terms of making more expressive and making more artistic. And then the last chapter is what we alluded to earlier. The last chapter is kind of bring all that together. Is going to be talking about the becoming an artist teacher and what steps can we follow to become that artist teacher.
That sounds really interesting. And the old theory teacher in me appreciates some of that stuff too. I mean, I spent all those years teaching students form for a reason. Let's talk about proportion and how things fit together, because it matters.
Yeah, understood.
All right. So how can people get in touch with you?
Probably the easiest way could be if they just Google me. One of the first things that will come up would be Austin Symphonic Band, my relationship with them, and there's an email address there. And if they send an email that way, then it would go directly to our webmaster, and he would forward it to me. But I'm sure nobody would want it right now, but it's a pretty easy email address. It's just rfloyd@utexas.edu. That's it. It's just like pretty much like everybody else that's been in a university. It's the university plus edu on the end of it. So, but that's.
Richard, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're very kind to bring me into the fold on this. It's been a pleasure to visit with you. And I wish you well as you continue this, and enjoy your vacation, for crying out loud.
I know. I have a couple days off here, so.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy them and love your family.